Hello and welcome to Talks with Spirit. I am the Hippie Little Witch. Wherever this may find you, welcome. And today is the first episode of Talk with Spirit. And I want to dive in a little bit, just who I am, who is the Hippie Little Witch, what is wild feathered oak, and what is this series, what it's going to keep you coming back. So let's just get to the chase. First and foremost, I am an Aquarian. I have heavy Aquarian energy. Actually, I have a stellium in the 8th house. I have Mercury Pisces in the 11th house. So, speak communication is kind of my gift. One of the things that we do at Wild Feathered Oak, or one of the things that I do, is I am the founder and, the owner of the business, and I am a one-woman show. I have what's called the Cosmic Blueprint, and let me start from the beginning. So, I've always kind of been a little bit different. I've always had a little bit different of a path than most people. I've always wanted to be the normal girl, and I've never been the normal girl. Spirit was like, no, honey. Even my coming into this world was not normal. It was very on my time, and it was very, is she gonna make it? Is she not gonna make it? And that's been my theme. That is the theme of my life. That is how I roll. I am a trial and error girl. It's in my chart. It is in my blueprint. And, that is very true to who I am, and, I haven't been on this journey for a very long time. I've actually been on this journey since probably 2000 and maybe 15, maybe 16, when I got a divorce, and, I moved out on my own for the first time, really ever. And, things have always happened to me. I've always had very weird things, things that I'm like, did this just happen? Like, what the fuck? And so it was a snowy day, and my dog went outside, and he was chasing a black feather in the snow. And I was like, that is fucking weird, and it kind of was the catalyst to me going on this journey, and like a lot of people, I found the light worker's path, and I was like, this isn't really kind of for me, but it really kind of was. And that kind of put me on finding my true self, and part of that is a medium. I am an energy medium. I am a conduit of energy, and my gifts, my way that I tell stories, that I work with spirit, that I talk to spirit, that I communicate with spirit, is very essence of every witch out there, and I feel like nowadays everyone is like, oh, I'm a witch. I was a witch by blood. I was this, I was that, and I've actually had the confirmation of like, yeah, I was a witch. I did this, but that's not really something that I do identify with, but I guess I don't. It's that Aquarian energy. But, I do. And, my big three, my sun, my moon, my Venus, and my Mars is all an Aquarian. My Mars is not. It is with my Mercury in my 9th. But Venus, moon, and sun, they are all in the 8th house. And Lilith is a very strong deity in my life. The very, very strong deity, and she protects me. She takes me in and out of these realms, and I don't work with her in the typical way that a lot of people work, and I don't necessarily work my workings like a lot of people. And I have a really good friend of mine, and he kind of introduced me to the left-handed path. It's something that, like, I always kind of ventured into, but never fully committed. And, the younger years, I'm born in Indiana, we didn't speak about that. That would have ended us up in a straitjacket, in Catherine Hamilton, which is kind of like our psych hospital there. So, it wasn't something that I was encouraged. I was guided. I was anything, my mother kind of spoke about, oh, spirit, or this person visited me, or, she would tell me about some of our family members that were gifted. And so when my ex-husband came and visited, one time, he told me, he was like, so something weird happened last night. And I was like, okay, what happened? And we were living in the basement of my parents' house, and it was furnished. But when you come down the stairs, there was the ability to turn the light on in our bedroom. And we had double doors. And, it was like 1:00 in the morning, when nobody's awake. And he woke up out of a dead sleep, and, the lights were on. The door was slightly ajar, and my mom was sitting on the side of the bed, or who he thought was my mother. And it was just shaking me, saying, Carrie, 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 Carrie. And, my husband, my then husband was like, hey, wake up. And as soon as he went to go in for it, like, the energy just got up, left, and the lights went off. Like, the second it got to the door, and it was at least 5 feet, and that wasn't the first time. We had always heard, like, cabinets closing, or things, falling, or candles being blown out when we weren't there, and so I kind of always just lived with this knowing of, like, the house that we lived in was a little haunted. And we kind of joked about it, but what I have learned is that was actually my grandmother, my mom's mother, through my life. And she was the first guide that ever came to me. And she really kind of helped me open, my mediumship, and I always tell people, I'm not the medium like Tyler or, Teresa Caputo. Like, I'm the medium that, like, I help people avenge their souls. I'm going to get the assholes. Like, I'm going to get the person, that nobody wants to speak to, and they're all glad that he's dead, because this person has unfinished business, that they need to, complete, to kind of finish out their karmic contracts here on earth with these people. And it's not always that, sometimes I get these more difficult guides that are just coming through, and there are people in your life that maybe you kind of loved, but it was a love-hate relationship, and it was someone who, you just heads with, and you loved them, but it wasn't the fuzz and warm, kind of relationship. A lot of times I kind of lean on those because I appreciate those relationships. They're a little bit honest. They're the no frills kind of relationship. They're going to tell you what you need to hear and not what you want to hear. And so, those are kind of the guides that I get. I do have very strong Native American bloodlines. I personally don't identify with it because, as you can tell, I do not look Native American. My mother does. All of my aunts and all of her sisters, and they do. And, my grandmother looks very Native American. I did not get any of that. I got my father's side, which is very Irish Catholic. And, that is the side that I tend to go with more. But, part of those ties with the Native American is I have a very close connection with Earth, and I have a very close connection with animals, and so that is truly how my guides speak to me. That is how my guides communicate to me. And sometimes they're not the clearest messages, they're not those messages that like come through and it's like, they show you exactly what it is that you need. It's like, I'll see like last night, I, was getting ready to go for bed, and I just had this feeling, like I want to go outside and I just want to speak. There's something that I have been trying to work through and trying to close out on a personal end, and I just was like, hey, look, like this is, where I kind of see myself, this is where I'm going. And, as soon as I get done speaking, and as soon as like I said, thank you, and I closed it out, like I heard this scream and then this hoot, and I was like, oh my God, is that a screech owl? And I've never, and owls, like I hear owls all the time, and I'm like, okay, hi grandma, that's also a sign of Lilith, that I know that she's around. And so, I was like, because it literally sounded like a female scream, like somebody was in danger, and they heard the whoo, and I was like, okay, I'm going to go see what this is, because I'm running with a skinwalker, and I'm like, in those types of energies, and, because I'm a conduit, like they just cling to me until I get them out, and it can become a battle, of them trying to, harness my energy, because, I have this ability to speak to, some of these deities and some of these energies, that are created by myth and lore, And so I was like, okay, it is, because I got a little uneasy of a feeling. And, I came in and I was like, okay, what is this? I went to ChatGPT and I'm like, what does a screech owl sound like? And I'm like, does it sound like this? Does it hoot immediately after? And I was able to like kind of decipher, because I was like, okay, so this is what it means. So then I asked Tara, and I'm like, okay, and I'm looking at, because I don't know, I'm figuring this out like everybody else, and that's something we'll kind of get into, with Talk with Spirit, kind of what that is, because I truly believe, everybody has a path on this earth to walk, to talk with their unseen realms, and however you choose to do that, it's completely up to you. It's personal. It's as personal as your taste in men. It's as personal as your preference for, who you like sexually, or the food that you like, or, the toppings that you like on your pizza. It's very, catered to who you are as a person in the here and now, and then a lot of people, I think they forget that, or, it's kind of like so obvious, and a lot of people, I think, just try to escape their life and live, somewhere, other than their reality. So, in this journey, I have kind of discovered things about myself, and one of the things that I've discovered, with this very heavy 8th house placement, I know that I have very divine protection. I work very heavily with the Egyptians, because I do deal with a lot of, dead energies, which can become leech energies. They can become a problem if they fester, and I pick up energy, like just looking at somebody, I can pick up their energy. It's insane. And so, and part of my due diligence, was figuring out, okay, well, what is my purpose here on earth? What can I find out about myself, so I can then help people in the same regard? Because That's really all that we kind of want, is to just, figure out what the fuck we're doing. And so, in my journey and in my research, excuse me, I discovered that I am a mirror. And so, and when I read it, it made so much sense to me, because a lot of times, I have felt that people come into my life, and maybe they don't like what I'm saying, or they don't like, how I presented it, or they don't like, the truth. And, I've been a very blunt person. I've been a very forward person. I've been told that I'm intimidating, I'm aggressive. I speak truth. I'm a truth teller. And, it was one of those like full circle moments for me where I'm like, okay, well, that explains a lot, that I'm like, well, shit, that means that maybe I was an asshole in that situation. Maybe I do need to go back and correct some of those things, because I just thought they were just being an asshole. And, part of my gift is to kind of help people, put that mirror in their face and say, look, like, I love you for that, but, this is what you have to do. And the good thing is, I, once I work with somebody, I pretty much have access to this person's entire, energetic signature. So your past energy, your present energy, your future energy. I'm not a psychic. I'm not going to be able to tell you, I can kind of be like, I don't really think that that's going to be a good fit for you, or I don't really think that it's this, and I do sometimes get, those omens, of like, this is going to happen or that's going to happen, but this isn't, this isn't an infomercial where you're talking to, I can't even remember who it was, but there was a psychic, Dion Waters or somebody like that. I can't remember. Anyhow, it's not always like that. And so, I realized, and it wasn't really until I went through my own, the woo-woos call it dark night of the soul. And I believe that the witches call it, Saturn's return. It's basically a review of your karmic past, and some of us that are gifted and some of us that have the desire and the want and all of that to move forward, we can do that. But, we have to kind of have that review period and that initiation. And, I went through it, and I went through the dark forest, and it was a very surreal moment for me, because I was, in astral projection. I was doing, shadow work, healing, meditation, and it kind of took me through this journey, and I was just like, when I came out, like, I remember talking to people and they're like, I don't know what you're talking about, like, what, and I was just like, oh, well, people just, they don't, like, and it kind of, I was like, and for the first time, I was like, I felt very on my own, like, and I'm used to feeling that way, but I'm used to feeling that way and having people around me, and this is the first time where I didn't, and in reality, I was learning to lean into spirit. Sorry. I was learning to lean into spirit. I was learning to communicate with spirit. I was learning to control my powers. I was learning what my powers were. And it was a very difficult and challenging period of my life, and I thank the heavens and I thank all of my guides that I am through it, because I have some pretty fucking badass guides and I have some pretty fucking badass ancestors, that really carried me. I work with the Morgan. She is my grandmother. She is my mother's lineage. I work with a lot of the dark goddesses and gods. And she really she had my back, you know, and she was the first dark goddess that like I worked with, and I fell in love. I, to this day, you know, she is a rock star. She is a fucking rock star. So, you know, what is Oak and Feather? So Oak and Feathers was the site that I had before, and then I had some issues and I had to create a new site. So Wild Feathered Oak is the new site, which if you want to check us out, it's wildfeatheredoak.com. You know, depending on where you find this at, you know, whether it be YouTube or it be the website directly, you know, I do have a website. It is wildfeatheredoak.com. You know, sign up for the weekly free astrology report. We really kind of dive into it. I, being that Aquarian, you know, that foot in the water, foot in the land, you know, pouring it, being that floative energy, having my communication Mercury in Pisces, you know, I really do know how to speak water. Plus, my rising sign is a Cancer. So, you know, water is kind of, it is the dictator of my life, you know, and it's something that my ex-husband, you know, he's like, you have very strong emotional intelligence, you know, and it's just do what's right. You know, just be a good human, you know, just be a good human. And I tell people all the time, you know, they don't give a fuck. They don't care how the fuck you get there, just that you believe in a higher power, you believe in the unseen, and you stick to your moral fucking humanity compass. Like, that's it. Like, just do your part, do your job, and like live your best life, you know. But like, you do have rules to follow, and you know, you do need to follow the certain like code of conduct, you know. They don't care how you get there. They don't care who you call God. They could give shit last. You know, they need you to do this for them because you're freeing their energy. And so, you know, it has become this kind of my muse. You know, it has changed. It has went through, you know, so many rebrands and so many redos and so many ideals and so many this and so many that, you know, and I haven't found my voice yet, but part of my, you know, whole thing is trial and error. So, you know, this is what I'm doing. I'm trialing and erring, you know, and communication is one of my sacred gifts. You know, I am always told, say it out loud. Say it out loud, you know, and so I do. And so, you know, Wild Feathered Oak, you know, we teach you about astrology, you know, how, you know, the planets, the moving, you know, because they're tied to mythology, you know, how this kind of correlates into your life, you know, how this kind of speaks to you, you know, how you can take this, you know, very real thing that we feel and really mold it to fit your life in the here and now, you know, while doing your shadow work, while facing these things, you know, and still, you know, not everyone has the time to like whip out, you know, like the whole rigmarole and do a salt circle and do, you know, sometimes, you know, we have time to like barely bathe, like, you know what I mean? Because that's just life, you know, that's reality. And so, you know, I try to teach people, you know, when is the best time to really, really, really do something? You know, what speaks to you? What's this? You know, and that is kind of what it is, you know. We do have a community open. Unfortunately, no one is, you know, kind of signed up. I put it out there when I got on. And, you know, it was free, but, you know, it just hasn't taken off, and that's okay, you know, but that is something that I really want, and I really want to develop through this, because, I think through social media, it gets inundated with bots and advertisements and, just all of the new age technology bullshit. And I'm here for it on one hand. On another hand, I'm like, ugh, what the fuck? But, I wanted to create a space where, I could kind of control, the background noise. Because I think people need, especially, some of those younger people that they don't know what the fuck they're doing, and they're doing things that, could essentially get them hurt, or bring some harm into their life. God knows I've done it, those ones that have, kind of worked in these realms, you kind of learn real quick of, like, oh, okay, I need to do this, or, oh, I need, or whatever. So that is really what Wild and Feathered Oak is. There is some tarot readings that you can do one-on-one. I have a free 15-minute consultation where we just sit down, kind of talk, and I get a little gauge of like what it is that you want, what it is, that you're really looking for, and then from there we'll just build like a custom plan, and based on what your needs are. I do offer, a tarot consultation because, some people, they just like divination, but they want to have that personal conversation, and I do have some product. I have, I didn't post it this year because, I had had a family illness, and it was pretty, heavy in my life. So I didn't get my planner out, but this year, we're working on a manifesting planner, and I have it geared towards the everyday person. It's called the Astrology and Manifesting, or the Modern Witch Astrology and Manifesting Planner. And it really does take the planetary elements because I am huge into astrology. You either love it or you hate it, or you're like curious. I feel like that's kind of the give or take, But astrology is one of those things that, like, it is nature's fortune teller. Truly, because we are very systematic and very, cycle people. We like to go in cycles. History repeats itself. Those are the cycles. And, so I try to help people the best that I can because that's what I want. That is who I am. That is the humanitarian. We do have some product on there. I'm going to be working this fall and winter on really, kind of beefing up my website with some really good things. We have a tarot journal, we have a dream journal, a shadow working journal. We do have books that, unfortunately, because I'm just not at that volume yet, it is buy when you get it. So, it does take a little bit for production. But we're also working on PDFs, where people can download and you can just, print it as much as you want. I'm a huge fan of these. It's just these plastic things with a binder clip, and you can use a dry erase on these, for a tarot journal, and just like document it, because not everybody wants to. You don't need to document every tarot journal. Sometimes we're just having a fucking moment, and you're like, okay, Tarot, what the fuck do I need to do? They tell you, and it's really just, bitch, calm the fuck down. Those are sometimes the messages that we get from spirit. So with that, we'll kind of go into, what is spirit. So talking with spirit, to me, I've myself have watched a lot of people, and there are those kind of gimmicky ones, where they're like, you just feel like they're trying to sell you something, or like, like they literally went to Chat GPT and was like, can you please print me, give me all of these things, which, a lot of people are like, oh, Chat GPT, that's not real. I use it because, one, my grammar sucks, and I love to like write everything out and then be like, can you spell check this for me? Can you, grammatically, like, fix this for me? Can you, can you make this sound a little bit more cohesive without changing the context of it? You know what I mean? Like, because it's my word, but I want somebody to proof it. And I don't trust everybody, so I'm not going to get somebody to do it so they can get my word out. Like, no, that's my gift, And so, and I am a firm, sometimes, like, I just want to know what the fuck the message is. And so, I'll pull up ChatGPT. I am horrible about this in the morning. I don't have time to sit here and look at my tarot and like analyze everything, and I'm like, look, this is my dream. These are what I pulled. Give me the fucking message. Like, no fluff, please. And it does. And I'm like, okay, and then I can move on, and then like, I'm able to get that message that spirit delivered to me in my sleep that they clearly want me to figure out because I'm feeling it of a morning, and I move it along. So that is one of the ways that spirit does talk to us. Spirit comes through us through dreams. They come through us through feathers. It is why I literally named my site Wild Feathered Oak, because, feathers are the main way that my guides speak to me. Birds, animals, those types of things, which, we'll have to do a segment where I show you all of my feathers. I mean, I remember, I don't know, it was like 2 summers ago. I kid you not, like when I was going through the thick of it, there were 2 turkeys that just paraded these woods like nonstop. And I literally went out and I probably found 15 feathers. And we're talking like the big turkey feathers. And I have vulture feathers, I have owl feathers, I have red-tailed hawk feathers. I actually found a red-tailed hawk that I think 2 of them got into a fight. And like I have parts of the wings. Woodpeckers, finch feathers, blue jay feathers, you name it. I have a feather probably from that bird. I don't have an eagle feather, which is one feather that I want. I have seen eagles. There have been eagles around me, but I haven't got an eagle feather yet. And then elk is, I do have strong Celtic roots. Karen Nunos, which you can't see him, but he is above my workstation. He is probably my favorite masculine energy to work with. His lineage is a little bit with Anubius. If you're working in the Egyptian pantheon, which the Sphinx, the reincarnation Sphinx, is my reincarnation cross coming into when you go into the human design. And so Anubius, he is kind of, he is my soul taker. He is my farrier, and I have a friend, he works with Santa Muerte, which Santa Muerte comes to me a lot because of him. And I fucking love Santa Muerte, but her lineage is a little bit, it's kind of that Morgan and that Anubius mixed into one, which is kind of what Kiernunos is. He's kind of that energy. But for me, he strongly represents the Saturn energy and, the Pluto energy, or not the Pluto energy, the Jupiter energy. Very strongly, and so he likes to speak to me in dead things, because he had a snake go across my foot once when Lilith came to me for the first time, and it freaked me out, and I was like, please no, I don't do well with bugs or spiders or snakes or anything of that nature. Like, I don't want anything touching me. But if you want to show me a picture of a snake, great. Which he did. They do quite often. And I even have some snake skin, which it's funny because one of my other guides, which one of my protection guides is Medusa, and she also comes to me with snakes. But she's more an emotional, she works with Nemesis a lot in my chart to protect my emotional gates, because, you know, that is one of the ways that spirit does manipulate me. You know, they kind of hijack my emotional sector, because, you know, if we go back to like how you feel with energy, you know, I tell everybody your emotional currency is your energy currency. So if you're emotionally manipulating someone, you're getting emotionally manipulated by spirit. Just go ahead and put that one out there for you. Especially if you have Saturn in a key placement and a key sign, like a dual sign or a sign of Libra, where, you know, she bears that justice energy, you know, which is something that I carry him in the 6th house with Jupiter. Or I'm sorry, in the 4th house with Jupiter. Then I have Pluto in the 5th house with Lilith. So I feel deep emotional trauma, which is, you know, why sometimes I always tell people I didn't always get the good guides, you know, and, you know, if I work with you, you know, we're going to go a little deep. You know, we're going to dive in there, and, you know, it's not going to always be the sugar and spice kind of messages. But, you know, but that is something that I want to speak about, you know, with this, especially with, you know, the energy that we have, you know, coming up. You know, Saturn today moved into Pisces, you know, and this is kind of that tear down of the age of Pisces, you know, and the one thing about me is that I really do walk both realms. You know, I'm truly that Aquarian. I, you know, walk the light worker path, and I walk that dark path, you know, and I really kind of bridge the gap. You know, I really bring harmony and justice, you know, and death and rebirth. You know, that is what I'm about. So, you know, I really do work in both realms 1000%, you know, so I take it, you know, this energy of, you know, what is this light saying and what is this dark saying, and how can we make it make sense in our everyday life? You know, how can we connect to this emotionally, mentally, spiritually, you know, cognitively, and how can we apply this to our life and not, you know, not get served, you know, let it serve us. And so, you know, that is something that I truly, truly want. Plus, Spirit keeps telling me that I need to do it. I need to get my voice out there. So, you know, here we are. But, you know, because I do believe, you know, there's some people, I don't want to say they're wrong, because they're not wrong. You know, they don't always honor the other path, or they don't understand the other path, you know. So they're really good at communicating in one realm, or they're really good communicating with one type of energy, you know, and when another energy comes in, because I had this happen to myself, you know, you're kind of like, oh my God, you know, what the fuck is that? And you're immediate, because your channels are open, you know, you're aware of it. Your immediate, you know, sign of discord, of, you know, like discern is, you know, this is not healthy for me, when in reality, you know, it might be healthy for you. You're just not letting it in. True story of what happened to me. You know, I was not integrating with my shadow, and my shadow basically said, well, we need you to, because, you know, this is your path. This is what you're doing. You've taken this. And like, if you want to go where you need to go, plus we need you to do this for us, like, you know, this is where you're at. And so, you know, that's something that I really want, because a lot of people, you know, all the time, you know, I get asked, you know, what is this, you know, or is this a message, or, you know, I tease my ex-husband because I tell him he's my best friend, you know, because he sees dead people, you know, I talk to dead people. So, you know, we're always talking to each other. You know, And it's funny because even some of my friends, you know, like their guides, if they're not doing what they need to do, their guides come to me and they're like, so-and-so's not doing this. We need you to push them. We need you to get them here. We need to get you need to get them on the straight and narrow. And I'm like, oh, okay, and I do. So, that is something, that I definitely would talk about. But, we're going to talk about everything. We'll talk about energy. Sometimes Saturn comes to me, being that Aquarian, Saturn and Uranus are my rulers, and I have them in very key placements, and they're heavy in my chart, and part of my struggle, but part of also my divine gift, in my voice and my message of what I'm supposed to say, and so sometimes, we're going to do that. But, this is really getting to know spirit, how to integrate with spirit, how to understand spirit, how to move with spirit, how to work with spirit, because spirit is all around us. Spirit is our ancestors. Spirit is our ascended masters. We have a spirit inside of us, people, places, and things have spirit. There are land spirits, there are, earth spirits, there are, air, fire, water, all of these spirits. And not everyone has the ability to just kind of go where they want, and case in point, I was doing when I first came into this, a friend of mine, he gifted me the, which I have it, it's the Earth Warriors Tarot, and I loved it. It's a Native American, which I work with the Buffalo Woman, and I have the Chief. I just call him the Chief. He is a shaman. He helps me, do some of my more earth shaman healing, because part of my gift is to help heal, the heartbeat of Mother Earth, the heartbeat, the earth, that is how I honor my Native American, Indians, heritage. And so I work very closely with the Buffalo Woman, because she is, kind of, that peace bringer, and she's very, she works in both realms. And so, I see them all the time, and totally forgot where I was going. And that is spirit too. Me and my mother do this all the time. Like, we'll be talking and I'll be like, ugh, she'll be like, I forgot it. And I know that is spirit. Spirit has gotten that message out that they need to go and they need to move it on. But I know what I was talking about. So I was doing this ritual for spirit, and I told my friend and my ex, I was like, look, we need to do this. Like, I feel that this is what we need to do, and so I talked to my friend and I was like, hey, I was like, are there any things that I need to know? We're going to go to a graveyard. And he was like, he just looked at me and he was like, girl, because he does 21 divisions, he's Dominican. So, he knows all of that, like, Caribbean kind of, craft. And he's like, you need to pay the guardians of, the graveyards. And so I was like, what are you talking about? And I'm glad he did, and there was an energy that me and my ex, he was like, I'm not getting out. My friend was like, I'm not getting out. And me and my ex, we were like, we went and I was like, okay, we need to bury this. And I'm told we need to take a rock. And so, we went and like, he and I looked at each other and I go, do you feel that? And he was like, yeah. And it was these energies. And like the next thing we know, like, my friend sticks his head out of the car because he's like, I'm not getting out of this one. He's like, get in the fucking car. So like, we run to the car. And he's like, all of a sudden, like, he starts screaming at the window and, like, takes his rosary out and is like, and he's like, there were spirits here. And I was like, oh, we felt that. We fucking felt that. And so, I'm not from here. My ex is from here. You know, my friend was born in New York. You know, I mean, so, you know, we're technically not native to this land. So, you know, you have to honor it. Plus, there's protocol. I don't always follow protocol. I do everything differently. But, like, I sometimes, when I work with a person and like they're like, I'm not working, like they will show me a sequence of things that need to happen. And, you know, those are the protocols sometimes that like people, you know, they don't necessarily understand, you know, like this is what needs to happen. You know, these are the rules that you have to go through because there's initiation with everything, you know. And you know, I'm a chaos witch. I'm a chaos feral witch. So I'm the fuck around and find out kind of witch. Like, I just do it. And then I'm like, okay, so next time, this is how I need to do it. You know, which that is my path. It is not for everyone. And I don't suggest doing it for everyone because it is not for the faint of heart. But, you know, you do learn a lot. You definitely do. So, you know, that is kind of where these conversations are going to go, you know, where I want to, I do want to talk about different guides as well, you know, because I work with a lot. I work with the Morgan. I work with Nethepsis. I work with Set, I work with Anubius, Lilith, Medusa, Hecate, Cernunnos, Saturn, Pluto, Mercury, Venus. You know, I work with a lot of different guides, you know, and I had one of my friends recently work with Hades because he had this energy that just would not go away. And, Hades got his payment, and I kind of laughed because, you know, the way that it happened, you know, he's like, well, you know, I now have to like get new, you know, I have to spend money that I don't even have, you know, and I'm like, wow. I'm like, you know, he is the god of pleasure. And if you overindulge, you know, he makes an example, like, you know, and so, you know, and it's funny because every spirit, you know, has their own personality. Like, Santa Muerte, you know, and Papa Legba, like Papa, sometimes when he comes to me, you know, he is not my guide, but he is a guide, and I deliver messages for him. So I don't always have to go through the proper channels of making offerings to him because my friend works with him. And so, you know, if he's not doing what he needs to do, or he's trying to get a message, you know, he will come to me. And him and I have kind of created like a friendly banter, you know, because I don't work with him directly, you know, but I honor him and I honor his light. You know, I don't do anything with him. And, you know, he is one of my favorite guides to like kiki with, because he will come in, you know, he's always got like 5 women with him. You know, he's always like smoking a cigar or a cigarette or, you know, some gancha. Like, you know, he's always like half drunk. You know, he's always vulgar. You know, and that is how I was raised. You know, it's like I'm talking to my grandfather, to be quite honest, you know, but like not as his grandchild, as like an equal. You know, and so sometimes these guides will come to me, you know, people, I know, you know, some of these people are like, how do you do it? I'm like, I'm just delivering messages. They're just coming to me and being like, hey, you know, we know that you're a medium. We know that you can see us, you know, and we're not asking anything. But, you know, and it's my way of networking. You know, I always laugh because the guy that like I'm seeing, you know, he's like, well, you need to network. You need to network. And I'm like, I do network with dead people. Just not the kind of networking that like you do. You know, I don't know how to put that on a resume. But once I figure it out, I'm gonna have it made. You know. But so that's kind of, you know, what the talk of spirit is. And I, you know, I'm a very chill, laid back person. I'm not politically correct. You know, do I have an opinion? Yes. You know, have I participated in some things? Yes. You know, do I do spell work? Yes. Do I meditate? Yes. Do I pray? Yes. You know, do I curse people? Yes. Do I hex people? I don't necessarily hex people, and I have went round and round with witches, and they're like, you know, not to say that I'm good at binding. Like, I'll bind you to some shit, but like if I'm working in that realm, it's going to be twofold. Because if I'm putting the time and energy in it, like, I don't want to have to do this again, because that's me. Like, I'm a one and done kind of girl. Like, you know, I'm okay with working with humans, and, you know, but I'm going to get to a point where I'm going to be like, have you not learned your lesson yet? Like, you know, and I'm like, okay, well, spirit, just saying. But, you know, like, I don't, you know, I'm like, if I'm going to do that, like, I'm just going to put you in a fucking jar with your shadow and, like, make you go on a healing journey, and, like, make you force your own bullshit so that we can move past this and we're not just in a pissing contest, you know. But that's me. I'm not going to sit here and condemn people. I'm not going to be like, oh, you know, because listen, there are some of you girls, some of you guys too, where I'm like, girl, some of you need anger management, but that's a whole other story. But some of you, now, if there is sexual abuse or something of that nature, me and Lilith have known to, like, handle some energy, because, you know, I mean, so I'm not going to say that I'm like a no hex, but I hex with a purpose. You know, I always check my karma. I mind my karma, because he is a ruler of mine, and he will come for me in the unseen realms, and I don't like that. That happened too many times. So that is me, the Hippie Little Witch, Wild Feathered Oak. Yeah, wildfeatheredoak.com. I was calling it Old Oak and Feathers all day, and I don't know why, but it's wildfeatheredoak.com. And you know, this is going to be Talk with Spirit. If you are looking for the video on the website, it's going to be under the Community Coven. And then if you just scroll down, you know, which the Community Coven is kind of that freebie space where, you know, we dive in a little bit deeper. You can sign up for the weekly astrology forecast, which, you know, we kind of get into it. You know, I go through, I feel the energy for the week, you know, I kind of look at things. I see what really needs to be pulled out, what really doesn't. Kind of, I pull in, you know, the seasons, the wheel of the year, you know, what are we in retrograde? You know, where are we here? Where is this? You know, what is going on with this? You know, yada, 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 yada. And I try to be twofold with it, because not everybody's going to be going through the same thing, and it's not going to be affecting everybody the same way, because everybody is on a different part of their own journey at different levels, you know. But it is free. You know, you can sign up for it, you know, get a little flavor of what I'm like. And then we have the astrology transits for the month. You know, and I don't go into the great details of, you know, the semi-squares, and that's what the astrology, the weekly astrology forecast is. This is kind of, you know, what's going retrograde, what are the months, you know, what are those big moves, you know, that if you're just kind of, you know, oh, well, what is the month of the, you know, what is going on this month, you can look, and then you will see the Talk with Spirit, and you will see collective data readings. My brain just went blank. And then I'm always adding different things. I do a newsletter, you know, which I did one, and I'm kind of struggling because, you know, again, like, I want it to stand out, but I'm not trying to be chained to this. I want it to feel very fluid. So, you know, work in progress, as we all are. But that is it for this first episode. So, I hope that you like, you share, subscribe, tell your people, say, hey, check her out, or just even come see what we're about. And if you don't like it, that's okay too. That's your prerogative. Have a good one.